Don't you just hate it when the applause dies out just before you sit down? Timing is everything. Ladies and gentlemen, you're all very welcome here this evening. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce Tana French and Lucy Foley. Tana's debut, In the Woods, was published in 2007, won every available American crime writing prize it was available for: the Edgar, the Barry, the Anthony and the McCavity. Since then, she has published a further 8 novels, of which The Hunter is her current offering. Tana has twice been shortlisted for the LA Times Crime Mystery Novel of the Year, and she won the Irish Crime Fiction Award for her novel, her majestic tour de force, in my opinion, Broken Harbour. All told, Tana has sold over 8 million copies of her books.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Lucy read English literature at University College London and Durham University. She worked as an editor at Headline and Hodder and Stoughton before she began writing full-time. Lucy published her first novel, The Book of Lost and Found, in 2015, and since then she has published a further 6 novels, including The Guest, The Hunting Party, and The Paris Apartment. The Guest was named in the New York Times Best Thrillers of 2020. Lucy's current novel is The Midnight Feast, which was published earlier this year and which will likely add handsomely to the 5 million books that Lucy has sold. So that's 8 million books and 5 million books, and if we add my worldwide sales to the total, that's roughly 13 million sales worldwide on this stage. Yes, indeed. So we're going to start off. I'll be talking to Tana and Lucy, asking them questions mostly about the new novels, but some questions about the older novels too. They're going to do a little reading for us as well, and we will give, for about 15 or 20 minutes at the end, we will have time for a Q&A, and I'm very much looking forward to that. Tana, if I can start with you. The Hunter is the second novel to feature the Chicago detective Cal Hooper, who is now retired and has moved to the west of Ireland for reasons best known to him, but hopefully we'll find out why. I can say that, by the way, I'm from Sligo originally myself, so I'm allowed to slag off the west, but nobody else, unless you're from the west yourself, of course. So tell us a little bit about Cal Hooper and why he decided to settle in the townland of Ardnakelty.
Right. Cal was a Chicago detective for 25 years, and he has come to the decision that there's something wrong morally in the process of being a detective. The line is basically, he's realized that one of them, him or the job or both, can't be trusted. And he's a man with a pretty strong moral code. He believes that there are certain things, good and right and wrong, should matter in this life. And he's come to feel that this isn't compatible with the job of being a detective. So moving far away from everything he's been, he feels like he's failed morally as a father, as a husband, and as a detective. So moving to this remote place seems to him it's going to be more peaceful, it's going to be simpler, God bless his heart, and it's going to give him a chance to find out how to be a good man again, in terms of action rather than just in intention, in terms of his moral code, to reconnect with that. And unfortunately for him, it doesn't turn out to be as simple as all that.
Yes, indeed. Little did he know. So will you give us a reading, perhaps this gives us a sense of Cal, if that's possible?
This is from The Hunter, where by this time, this is the second book about Cal, and by this time he's kind of made friends with a sort of half-feral local teenager, and they've come to have kind of a surrogate, strange, makeshift father-daughter relationship. But all that is about to come under threat. Trey squats by the assortment of scrap wood and starts poking around. Cal dusts off the chair with a soft cloth, leaving space for the kid to talk into if she feels like it, and watches her. She's grown. 2 years ago, when she first showed up in his backyard, she was a scrawny, silent kid with a self-inflicted buzz cut and a half-grown bobcat's urge towards both flight and fight. Now she's up past his shoulder. The buzz cut has relaxed into a rough crop, her features are getting a new clarity, and she rummages and sprawls around his house like she lives there. She even has entire conversations, or at least most days she does. She's got none of the polish and artifice that some teenagers start developing. But she's a teenager all the same, both her mind and her life getting more intricate every day. The things she says just about school and her friends and whatever have new layers underneath them. Cal is having more trouble with it than she seems to be. These days, every time he picks up a whiff of something on her mind, the bloom of terror inside him spreads wider and darker. Too many things can happen at 15 and do too much damage. Trace seems solid as hardwood in her own way, but she's taken too many knocks in her life not to have cracks in there somewhere. Cal finds a clean rag and starts rubbing down the chair with the vinegar mix. The sticky coating comes away well, leaving long brown streaks on the rag. Outside the window, blackbirds' rambling songs carry from far across the fields, and bees revel in the clover that's commandeered Cal's backyard. The dogs have found a stick to play tug-of-war with. Trey, holding two pieces of wood side by side to compare them, says, "My dad came home." Everything in Cal comes to a dead stop. Of all the fears that were milling inside him, this wasn't one. He says, after what seems to be a long time, "When?" The question is a dumb one, but it's all that comes into his head. "This morning while I was getting the chair." "Right," Cal says. "Well, he here for good or just for a while?" Trey shrugs extravagantly, no idea. Cal wishes he could see her face. He says, "How are you feeling about it?" Trey says flatly, he can fuck off. "Okay," Cal says, "that's fair." Maybe he ought to be giving the kids some bullshit speech that includes the words, "but he's your daddy," but Cal makes it his practice never to bullshit Trey, and his feelings on Johnny Reddy happen to coincide with hers. Trey says, "Can I stay here tonight?" Cal's mind stops again. He goes back to rubbing down the chair, keeping his rhythm even. After a moment, he says, "You worried about something your dad might do?" Trey snorts, "Nah." She sounds like she's telling the truth. Cal relaxes a little bit. "Then what?" Trey says he can't just walk back in. She has her back to Cal, rummaging among the wood, but her whole spine has a taut, angry hunch. "Right," Cal says. "I'd probably feel the same way." "Can I stay so?" "No," Cal says. "Not a good idea." "Why not?" "Well," Cal says, "your dad might not be happy about you taking off the minute he's back in town. And I figure I'd best not start off by pissing him off. If he's going to stick around, I'd rather he didn't have a problem with you hanging out over here." He leaves it at that. She's old enough to understand some, at least, of the other reasons why not. "I'll call Miss Lena, see if you can spend the night there." The kid starts to argue, but she changes her mind and rolls her eyes instead. Cal finds, to his surprise, that he feels shaken, like he just fell off something high and he needs to sit down.
Very good. Thank you very much, Tana. So Lucy, the Midnight Feast. The Midnight Feast opens with Bella. She's arriving at the quote-unquote Country Eden, the manor in Dorset. Brand new destination hotel. Now, Bella is a woman who, quote-unquote, looks like London and money, but is acutely aware that she is, quote, constructing a new persona around my rented wardrobe. This is a fascinating character right from the first couple of paragraphs, in my opinion. So tell us, who is Bella and why does she feel this need to adopt a disguise?
Well, yes, to all intents and purposes, she is a guest at the hotel. She is our kind of eyes and ears into the world of the manor, I suppose, this sort of rarefied world of this luxury hotel. But we realise, as you say, quite quickly that she's not quite who she's pretending to be. I love the idea that, you know, if you can afford the price of a hotel room, you can essentially be anyone. You can turn up, you can stay. It's a sort of weirdly, the manor is not a kind of democratic place, but it is also a weirdly democratic place in that sense. You know, you can become someone else. And we realise quite quickly that Bella has been to the manor before, herself in a previous incarnation, and when the manor was in a previous incarnation as a private home. I don't know how much more to say without giving things away, but it sort of leads us back to this sort of little dark childhood to teenagerhood tale.
Very good. And the novel then proceeds in parallel timelines with Bella
Yes.
as a teenager and also as an adult.
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. So will you be happy to do a reading for us?
Yes, I thought I'd read kind of right from the beginning of Bella's part, really, just to kind of introduce us to this world and add a little bit to her. June 2025, opening night. Bella. It's opening night of the Manor, the new jewel of the Dorset coastline. The drama is all out in front. Soaring ocean views, emerald lawns stretching to the cliff edge, the Owen Dacre designed infinity pool. But on this side, the landward side, there's another world, a bristle of dense ancient forest behind the main building, which guests can access via a series of gravel paths that wind between the woodland hutches. One of these is mine. I close the door, follow the sound of music and laughter through the purple twilight to the welcome drinks, which are taking place on the very edge of the trees. I step into a chic take on a woodland grotto. Hundreds of lanterns hang from branches. An actual harpist plays. Antique rugs and huge scatter cushions have been strewn about the forest floor with a bohemian abandon. I sit down on one, gulp back a woodland spirit cocktail, a dash of locally infused birch bitters and rosemary-infused gin. My fellow guests loll around, chatty and giddy with the anticipation of a weekend in the sun beside the sea, with nothing to do but eat, drink, swim, and make merry. Many of them seem to know one another, wandering about, shrieking as they bump into old friends, some reclining on the rugs and calling to acquaintances to join them. The vibe is relaxed, albeit spiced with a faint note of social competition. No one needs the ultra-soft woolen blankets provided because, though the sun is setting, it's still warm enough to wear only a single layer of linen. There's a lot of linen. The first flare of the impending heat wave. In the middle of the scene, like a fairy queen, like Titania on her woodland throne, sits the owner of the manor, Francesca Meadows, radiant in a pale rose off-shoulder fantasia of washed silk, hair rippling down her back, face aglow with candlelight. The culmination of a dream, that's what she said in the article. I'm so excited to share this place with everyone. Well, everyone who can afford it anyway, but who's quibbling? I look around me. I suppose it's all pretty idyllic if you're part of a couple or a larger group, if you've come here for a weekend of escaping the city. Maybe it's just me for whom it doesn't feel quite so mellow and chummy. I wait for the alcohol to hit, my gaze flitting towards the deepening shadows between the trees, to the ragged ceiling of branches uplit by the lanterns, down to my own outfit. Linen, yes, but with the telltale creases that show it's just been pulled from a packet. But the one place my eyes linger time and again, I can't help it, is on the face of Francesca Meadows. She looks so zen, so very fucking content.
Thank you very much, Lucy. So, Tana, I'll come back to you. The hunter, we've met, or we've been told Johnny Reddy, who's Treya's dad, he's coming in. That's an important aspect of the story. Johnny comes bearing news, and hopefully it's not giving away too much. There's gold in them Dar Hills, in the townland of Ardnakelty. And Johnny is kind of paving the way for the English businessman Killian Rusborough. How do the locals in Ardnakelty respond to this news that there's this gold there that they never realised was there at all?
Well, that's a powerful thing to find out. What happens is Treya's dad comes back. He's brought with him an English millionaire whose granny came from around Ardnakelty and who has passed down this story of there being gold somewhere in them there hills, as you say. And they're going to find it together. There's an opportunity for everybody to find it together. And this is a powerful thing because you're talking to farmers here for whom their land is something they are very connected to. It is the concrete embodiment of their livelihood, their history, their work, the blood, sweat and tears they've poured into it. But now it's become something else as well. It's got the potential to be a source of wealth in a way that they hadn't imagined. And this comes at a moment where the book's set during a heatwave summer, which is going to have a real impact on them. It's not just like, for city people, we can take the day off and go have an ice cream and skive off down to the beach. For them, this is a real threat to their livelihood. It's going to harm the amount of feed they have for the cattle over the winter. It's going to harm the lamb crop in next spring. The weather is a real it's a real threat to them. And so when the land starts looking like something else, when it starts looking like a potential source of gold, that's very powerful stuff, and it transforms their relationships with them and with each other, and it leads to a lot of tension in there. But it was actually, it came out of the fact that I was thinking of these books as sort of mystery software running on Western hardware. They've got a lot of Western tropes thrown in there. And in The Searcher, the previous book, it's, the stranger in town, the stranger who blows into the saloon and he's got a past and things are going to change around him. He's going to be a catalyst. But in this one, I was thinking about that trope of gold and them there hills. And it is not as unlikely as it sounds. Because it's true what Johnny says in the book, that there are more gold artifacts from ancient times found in Ireland than basically anywhere else, like mile for mile, and that there still are little gold rushes through the centuries. There have been in Ireland through the centuries, right up until today. You still have people going, wait a minute, in the Curlew Mountains, at the border, could we find gold? Is there enough to make it worth our while? So this is actually something that has its roots in reality.
Absolutely. Is there enough to make it? There are, as you say, there's plenty of gold out there. What I loved in this novel was the very realistic way in which the community responds to the possibility of gold fever. It sounds like a kind of thing you'd see in a Paddy Wackery Irish movie. This is completely rooted in my experience of rural communities. And I loved that.
Thank you so much. That is the best thing someone could say to me, because I was quite aware that, I'm a city girl writing country communities, so no matter how much time I've spent there, I wanted to get it right.
Yeah, well, I have a question about that, and I felt it was steeped. I would like to ask Lucy, you referenced Francesca, who is so bleep, 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 bleep zen in that little excerpt. So she is the owner of the manor, and she's the big picture woman. She is described at one point, and it's my favourite description in fiction this year, as a goopy yoga princess. I would like to hear a little bit more about Francesca, and especially that all-important goopiness. And is she even loosely based on someone famous we might be familiar with?
Oh my goodness. Absolutely.
This has been recorded, by the way.
Yes, exactly. Absolutely can't say on that point in case I get sued. I mean, I don't really know where she came from, but she was way too much fun to write, this character, I have to say that. It was so enjoyable, and I think I hopefully just about get away with, because she has a sort of first-person point of view element in the narrative, and I think hopefully I just about get away with her ridiculousness because it's sort of balanced by the other voices and not everyone's quite so nuts. But I was interested in the idea of this place itself going through this sort of rebrand as this kind of new countryside hotel, but also having sort of centuries of history as this private residence. Her family have owned it for centuries. There are kind of myths and legends about it. There's always been this antagonism with the local community and the sort of lord lived in the manor. And also the idea of Francesca herself having undergone this fairly hefty personal rebrand, and she's done that sort of via wellness and white linen and sort of sage sticks and all of that. And I just sort of, it was like pulling a thread, as it often is with these themes. And, there was just so much there with this sort of wellness stuff. I have nothing against wellness per se. I'm a fan of anything that makes you feel better. But it did occur to me that there are a lot of sort of bad actors out there and a lot of people making plenty of money off kind of unverified claims, and she's sort of one of them in a way. But there's more to it than that. This is someone trying to conceal something fairly dark that's happened in their past, and sort of thinking, it's this idea of, living in the present is all very well, but what if you're living in the present so that you can sort of just jettison the past? And it was this idea of, should you have to pay for your past crimes? Can you do that? Can you live in the moment, in the present, if you've done some fairly heinous things? I'm trying to say this without giving any spoilers away. But she was just a fascinating character to write.
I would imagine she is, and the dynamic between the public Francesca and the private Francesca is both sinister and hilarious. Beautifully crafted character. Really enjoyed her. the relationship between Cal and Trey. So you mentioned Trey in the reading that you did. The relationship has been integral to both novels at this point. The character of Trey, she bounces off the page. There's a rage about her, barely subsumed. Where does she come from? Why did you tap into that particular character, I suppose? I'm interested.
I'm not sure where she came from. She is, I have to say, an awful lot of fun to write. But I was thinking about Cal, about this guy who's come here thinking that everything's going to be simple. He has left behind every element of being a detective. He doesn't want anything to do with that. And suddenly, someone comes up demanding that he be a detective again, but with none of the accoutrements of a detective. He doesn't have backup, he doesn't have a gun, he doesn't have a badge, he can't, phone up the technical bureau and ask them to dump a suspect's phone and find out what happened. He's got nothing left of a detective except what's become innate to him, the skills that have been built into him over the years. So it becomes about what are the external trappings versus what is the essential stuff that you internalize. And I was just thinking about who would be able to demand that of him. And clearly, if somebody who is, well able to do this for themselves shows up, he's not going to do it. He's going to go, no, sorry, I'm off duty forever now. Who would actually be able to drag him back into that area of his life that he's found so difficult, so fraught, so morally devastating? And the only person I could think of was a teenager with a single-minded agenda who refused to let him get away. So that's where Trey came out of. She had to be not only that age, but also that level of ferocity and stubbornness to demand this of Cal. And then I started getting into the fact that this second book in particular, The Hunter, is to a large extent a book about family. But it's both the families we're born with, but also the ones we construct for ourselves. And Trey and Cal's girlfriend Lena have at this point built this strange kind of raggedy pieced together from whatever bits are at hand family. But then the two things come into conflict. When Johnny, Trey's dad, comes back and he wants her on side for this plan that he's got going on, this big plan to, make millions and everyone will be rich and it'll be great and I'll be the hero. And he needs Trey for this. He needs her. And so she's tugged between these two forms of family. And because Cal and Trey's relationship is quite new and is being built in bits, it's fragile still. And that's what I kept thinking about, is what would happen if this relationship came under threat before, the glue had time to set, almost. Where's Trey going to land? Especially if, as you say, she's angry, she wants revenge, and especially if this comes with the opportunity to get that revenge. What's that two-way pull going to do to her? So yeah, somebody at that point in life, a teenager torn two ways, is a lot of fun to write.
Yeah, I can imagine. At 3 different points while I was reading this novel, so my daughter is 16 at this point, so at 3 different points in the novel, Trey had a big decision to make, and I went, I know exactly what she's going to do here. And all 3 times, of course, I was completely wrong. So, there you go. Trey's a terrific character. Lucy, our own John Connolly once said that the crime novel is a Trojan horse, in that it can smuggle almost any kind of theme into the narrative form. What I was interested in with The Midnight Feast was the backdrop. There's a socio-economic backdrop there that's quite important. Very much a strong contrast between the haves and the have-nots in Dorset. What I want to ask is, is there a consciously political aspect to that writing? Or is that kind of writing unavoidable if you're just going to be honest about the world that we're living in today?
Oh gosh, I think a bit of both. I mean, I don't plot these books very carefully. Because to me that's not writing. I want to go on a journey. So I have a kind of idea of my sort of stopping points along the way, my sort of themes. The themes that I was conscious of in this book when I started out were this sort of folk horror thing I wanted to bring in, this kind of rural setting, and this sort of teenage backstory. But along the way, things creep in, and so I think it was the inevitability of those sort of. It felt very much like a post-COVID book. I mean, I think these tensions have always been there, the haves and have-nots, but there was also this thing that happened in COVID where wealthy city dwellers thought, you know what, the countryside is quite a nice place, and maybe we'll sort of head out. But this idea that these sort of city folk, and I've seen it, I come from the countryside myself, I've also lived in the city, I've come back to the countryside, so I feel like a sort of weird hybrid, and I sort of in some ways sort of embody the tension in this book in a kind of awkward way I haven't quite made peace with. But this idea of these city folk also wanting a kind of sanitized version of the countryside. So they want their kind of very clean pigs, and they want to go out in their kind of hunter wellies and have this sort of fragrant experience. They're all quite offended by the sort of smelly farm down the road because the scent of the manure, can we call it a scent? The kind of odour of the manure wafts over the infinity pool at the wrong time of day. So it was sort of playing with all of that. But yeah, I mean, Francesca is the sort of the real kind of nexus of evil, I suppose, here, because she has tried to reroute a footpath, which you absolutely cannot do in the UK. And that set me on this whole sort of wonderful kind of research journey of discovery. I hadn't realised until I read this wonderful book by an author called Nick Hayes, Trespass, that I think it's 92% of the British countryside is unknowable to British people because it's all owned by these big landowners. And I rent from a big landowner. The county that I live in, again, this is being recorded, I feel like I might get my sort of tenancy revoked, but the county that I live in, West Sussex, like most of the county is owned by 3 big landowners. There's this project to kind of, I'm going off on a real tangent here, but sort of kind of renew this sort of railway line with all these sort of garden projects. And it was really easy for them to get the permissions for it because they only had to ask sort of 2 landowners because hundreds of miles just travels through there. So yes, I found a lot there that I wanted to explore. And it was just fun, hopefully, to do it in this way, to sort of poke fun. Eddie, I think, my sort of potwash character is a way of exploring all of that because his parents own the farm down the road, the smelly farm. He doesn't tell anyone where he lives because of that, because he's sort of ashamed. He's sort of the lowest rung of the ladder in the manor world. So he sort of embodies these tensions as well. He got a job there because it's really the only job going locally.
Sure, yeah.
I think you end up doing that automatically in a way with murder mysteries. They're just, because the stakes are so high instantly, you've got life and death, you've got truth and justice, and you're going, what would make one person kill another person?
Absolutely.
So you're instantly going to be tapping into what are the dark places in this society, what are the priorities, what are the points of tension and the points of fear. So things like that, those class tensions in the countryside versus rural, those surface so easily through a murder mystery.
So easily, absolutely. And I suppose it's, I suppose what I write kind of country house murder mysteries are sort of modern, and it's so easy to find that kind of upstairs downstairs formulation in sort of modern society. It's there. It's just a slightly different sort of different version of it.
Sure, yeah. You both actually, traditionally the crime novel tends to thrive in built-up urban settings where there's millions of people and there's an anonymity and so forth. Ye both have recently chosen to, not all, but you tend to set it in rural settings, sparsely populated and so forth. Obviously a conscious decision, and I'm wondering what's the thinking, what's the planning behind that?
Okay, for me, one of the big fascinating things about this, I've spent a certain amount of time down the West ever since I was a teenager. I love it. And one of the things that I find fascinating is what being part of a community means there, is the inability to ever be actually isolated, even if you want to be. Like up in the city, right, if you want to cut yourself off from your community, basically don't play your music too loud, don't let your dog bark, you're good. You can be cut off. But down the countryside, that's not the case. You are part of this community, and your decisions and your actions have an impact on everybody around you, whether you intend them to or not. Kind of in The Searcher, the book before this, there's a bit where Lena talks about how all the women, when women started to be able to have decent jobs in kind of a couple of generations back in Ireland, so many girls went off to the city to get more interesting jobs, meet more interesting people. And that's left a load of men growing old alone with nobody to marry. And that's changed the entire tenor of the community, and they're feeling a little bit more cut off. They're a little bit more paranoid about the outside world because they don't have kids coming up to make it seem less threatening to them. And so what seems like a very personal decision, I'm going to move to Dublin to be around, more interesting nightlife. It seems like an individual decision, but it's not. It has a knock-on impact on your whole community. And when you live down the country, that is a fact. You're all interwoven, you're all knitted together, and you pull one thread and there will be an effect throughout the web. And that was something that I thought would be fascinating to write about. And it meant that if you're writing a murder mystery, any murder is going to come out of a very different place from just the more isolated, more anonymous things that you get in city set books. It's going to come out of this entire web of a whole community knitted together, and you're going to have to acknowledge that. You can't just write about a murder that involved the two people, the murderer and the victim. You're going to have to acknowledge the fact that this is part of that whole tapestry.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I remember Fintan O'Toole was writing about why the crime novel didn't work in Ireland previous to the Celtic Tiger, effectively, and he was saying it's because Ireland was a series of villages. Even Dublin was a series of villages. So if there was a murder and the Gardaí turned up, someone would go, yeah, no, it was him.
Yeah.
That guy there.
But
so there was no murder mystery per se.
But that's what's interesting, is how, what happens around the murder, a whodunit.
Sure.
Yeah, I think he's got a point. The whodunit probably isn't where we would want to really focus.
Yeah, but you have folded that over with these novels and leaned into that fact that everybody is so familiar with one another. You take it even a step further, Lucy. So your settings are very much enclosed. So it's an island. It's the Paris apartment. It's, so what is it? So some writers might find that quite limiting. You obviously find it quite liberating. What is it that's liberating to you?
Well, I mean, practically speaking, writing these sort of closed circle, as they're called, murder mysteries, you've got that kind of ring fencing of your characters. So it's that sort of, I suppose there's a kind of contract between you, the author, and the reader, saying, these are the people I want you to be looking at. If you're going to play detective, here's your pool of suspects. So that's sort of helpful. But for me, it's sort of, and it's often people that have been kind of transplanted. So you have the locals, but you have people entering this new environment. And what does that do to them? What does that kind of bring out in them? If they're in nature, kind of nature red in tooth and claw, what does that sort of surface that otherwise they might be able to keep tamped down, connected to their sort of creature comforts, their kind of usual lifestyle, something kind of latent and perhaps feral coming to the surface. I'm fascinated by that. And I think I took it sort of one step further in this book with this sort of folk horror element. I really wanted to sort of play with the tropes of kind of Into the Woods. There's this wonderful Shirley Jackson story, The Man of the Woods, that was the kind of jumping off point for that. Really kind of bringing out the darkness.
When as an Irish reader, I found there was a real Celtic element to that folk horror that you bring into it. That idea of an Irish person or a farmer would never cut down a hawthorn tree, for example, or mow through a fairy ring. Or, I can't let the closed environment novels go without mentioning Broken Harbour, of course, which was the great post-Celtic Tiger novel for me. I had the pleasure of interviewing Tana at the time when that was published in 2012. And you had this to say about the porous border between literature and genre fiction. I really don't believe in this borderline that exists between genre fiction and literature. It shouldn't be an either-or situation. Just because you kill somebody off, that shouldn't mean it's perceived as a particular kind of book. Has anything happened in the intervening years to change your mind about that opinion?
Absolutely not.
Good.
No.
Delighted to.
God, no. No, more than ever. I think I'm a believer that borderline is completely artificial. And not only that it is now, but that it has been since day one. I mean, if you look at Patricia Highsmith, who's written what are considered some of the great crime novels ever, those are incredibly incisive, disturbing literary novels, peeling back layers of character and personality and class tension and societal tension. No, I don't believe in either or. I think there's something very lazy to me in the idea that, well, over here we have genre fiction, and it's got a gripping plot, and the writing is, maybe workmanlike, and the characters are two-dimensional, but you read it on the beach. And over here we have literary fiction, and it might not have much of a plot, it might not be very interesting, but, it's got thematic depth, and the prose is beautiful, and the characters are three-dimensional. I don't see why readers shouldn't demand all of the above. Why shouldn't you have all of it? And we might not always succeed in giving them all of it, but why shouldn't we do our best? Why shouldn't we try to offer them all of those things in one?
Sure, yeah. Lucy, where do we stand on?
No, I mean, I absolutely agree. I just read Kate Atkinson's latest Jackson Brodie novel. I don't know if you read. It's just as kind of formally playful, as kind of as much kind of literary merit as any of her, literary fiction works or straight fiction works. It is utterly brilliant. And yeah, I absolutely agree. I want great characterization, great plot. I want, all of those things. And I don't think we need to make distinctions.
Very good. We are all in agreement then. It's fabulous. Folks, I'm going to open it up in 1 second for questions from the audience. So if I think we need somebody to be on hand with the microphone. One last question for Lucy, if I may. The guest list, which goes even further west than Tana has done, and sets the guest list on a remote Irish island. I understand that originally it was supposed to be a Greek island. What in the name of God got into you, woman?
Oh my goodness, so many things. So funny enough, I normally start with a setting and the book kind of grows out of that and the characters grow out of that. But I had this idea, I want to set a murder mystery at a wedding. Wouldn't that be fun? Because there's so much to kind of play with. Wouldn't that be fun? I'm so evil. And so I thought, well, I'd quite like to go to Greece on a research trip. And the hunting party was a bit chilly, so maybe I kind of flip things and we go hot. And then it wouldn't take light on the page, it wouldn't work. And I was just talking to my editor about this, and she said, have you thought maybe it's a little bit Mamma Mia? And we realised that probably was one of the issues. There's some brilliant Greek crime set on Greek islands, but I wasn't the one to write it. And I happened to travel to Connemara, to get on the ferry to kind of Inishbofin, to visit some of the other islands by boat with my husband. This often happens to my poor husband. We go somewhere on holiday and then I think, this would be a great place to sort of kill someone off and have a murder mystery. And we spend the whole holiday sort of trudging around, plotting it all out. And that happened. I mean, it was standing on Inishbofin, sort of looking out to sea west and thinking there's nothing there until you sort of hit North American coastline, and the wind, and thinking this is this beautiful, stunning place, the sort of place that someone like Jules very ambitiously might choose to sort of have this destination wedding, get a guest there. But also it is that kind of nature red in tooth and claw, wonderful sort of folklore there, the peat bog. It was just right there, ready for me to use.
Fabulous.
I hope I did it justice.
Absolutely. Tana, I grew up, I was born and bred somewhere adjacent to Ardennacalty, so not quite an expert on that particular townland, but the locals felt very familiar, uncannily familiar to me, and particularly the way they were prepared to, quote unquote, leprechaun up for the incoming English businessman. If he wanted gormless Irish, they were prepared to give it. Now, you've mentioned that you've been down to the west quite a few times. How much research was required? Because that novel feels absolutely steeped in rural Ireland.
Okay, that is the best compliment anyone could give me about that book, because I was worried about that. Because that's, especially as somewhere in Dublin, you really don't want to run the risk of looking like you're patronising the peasants, because that's not what I had in mind at all. And again, I've been spending time in Galway since Irish college as a teenager, and as much time as I possibly can since then. And I was paying attention, for one thing, linguistically, right? Because I wanted to make sure that every phrase, every word that I used was something I had heard from somebody of the correct age group in the West, because there's been a huge shift linguistically.
Sure.
Like a 70-year-old in Galway isn't going to talk the same way as a 40-year-old. There's been a huge shift. But also that idea of what gets used within a community as a tool or a weapon or a testing instrument against outsiders, and that ability to leprechaun up and, begorra, yeah, sure, the tourist wants this mode of engagement, sure, we can give it to him. And that is one of those tools for testing a person or for nudging him in a direction that I've seen used, and that clearly gets used against, the Dubs bopping down there for the summer as well. So, I've been on the receiving end, and you want to keep your wits about you.
Yeah,
so I'm very glad it sounds authentic.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. So we're going to take some questions now, folks. I suppose we'll do the old Lámha Suas, if anybody has a question that they want to.
Irish countryside. I'm very interested in this theme of the code of silence and how you as writers get through that, not so much in England. There's more history that hasn't been burnt. Whereas in Ireland, there's this fascinating code of silence, which I've hit myself very recently. We came in from France and bought a house by mistake. And I'm living, in a way, your Manor House book from a point of view of reality rather than fiction. By mistake, we bought an Orange Order house with a prison. And so I'm interested in your book, but I don't think I'll read it because we're living the history and the reality in the village, which is the theme of no deeds. Ireland having no deeds. And I think this is a fascinating story that perhaps you could put into fiction because it might not be so painful. But this idea that there is a world and it is covered in the code of silence. And I can talk about the reality of that in a village.
We're at a tangent to a question I asked you. So Tana, as an outsider visiting the West, I don't know about when you were doing your research in Innisbottle, what kind of reaction did you get? Did people know you were there to research? Did they know you were going to write about the area? And how did that impact on the locals?
See, I wasn't going there to research, though. I was going there because I would have gone anyway.
Okay.
And just paying attention. So I think that makes a little bit of a difference. Like, I mean, I was not there trying to sort of pump people. So that probably does make a difference to an extent. But there definitely is that atmosphere of, as the song says, whatever you say nothing. And it is very grounded in history, the idea that anything you say can and will be used against you, and it could be at any point. And so people are very guarded, people are very careful, but there's also, if people want to say something to you, they will talk in circles around it. Nobody's going to come out and say to you, just for example, to take the example that you used in the book, look, you are really pissing people off by trying to move that footpath. You wouldn't want to do that. No one's going to come out and say that to you. It's going to be in circles around the fact of, oh, yeah, I remember walking that footpath. Yeah. My mum talks about, going courting with my dad on walks down that footpath in the 60s. And they'll circle closer and closer around it until the point where you go, oh, God, okay, I just got it. And the penny drops. Then I assume and hope that you get better and better at it as you get used to it. But there definitely is a type of circling the point that could take a while to get used to.
Okay, very good. Any other questions? Yes, here in the front, please.
Ask you if you would stand up. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the insightful session. This question is less related to just Searcher and Cal, but more with the Dublin Murder Squad also, Tana. Your novels are more of a character study, which are basically you come upon it because of the conflict that you set with the murder in them. So what comes first? The crime that you use in order to explore the characters, or does the character come first and then you get to the crime?
I usually start off with, I've got three things. The first one is usually, you're right, it's a very strong sense of who the main character is as a person. And then there'll be the setting, like same as you, I start with a setting, a core setting very early on, like whether it's, the house in the Witch Elm or the village in the Searcher, and a really basic premise. The crime sometimes doesn't come till much later. Like with The Hunter, I didn't even know who was going to get killed until about halfway through. I kind of had it narrowed down to one of two people, but I didn't know which one it was going to be, and I definitely didn't know who had done it. Because since I'm starting off, I acted for a long time, so I'm coming at this like an actor where the character is the heart of everything and all the actions are going to come out of who the character is. So I have to start with the character and then write all of these characters for a while before I figure out who would do what to whom for what reason. And it means that a lot of the time I have to go back and rewrite because it'll suddenly hit me, oh my God, this person's going to die, and oh my God, this person killed them. So I have to go back and make sure that that's solidly seated through the action of the book. But it's kind of the only way that works for me is starting from that character and that setting and that really basic premise. And I do envy the writers who start with plot and have everything like outlined. Like I know writers who outline everything chapter by chapter before they even start writing, because at least they know there's a book there. You know, they know there's going to be an end. No, you know, they know there's going to be an ending. Whereas I'm going, I could at some point get 3/4 of the way through and go, okay, I have no idea how to tie up all these loose ends. But I figure the payoff, the trade-off is that things come to me as a surprise. So hopefully there is that element for the readers as well, where they're following the character rather than the plot. So while the character is cohesive, they get that same element of surprise that the character does. Hopefully. I keep my fingers crossed.
And just to add to that, for me it feels that then when you have the twist, it feels earned because it comes from character, and that's the only way I know how to do it. And I'm so relieved you have a similar process, because so often I've sat up on stages with other authors and they outline their process, and I think I have such imposter syndrome as an author anyway, and I think that's how a proper author does it. But Tana French does it like me, so it's okay.
We'll be disorganized together, it'll be great. So to me, it feels more organic. It feels like it springs more from character than from the needs of the plot. So that's what works for me.
Something that works for Alex Barclay. So I have to write chronologically, as in from A to Z. So Alex Barclay likes to write out her chapters on postcards and pin them up. And then every morning when she comes to the desk, she decides on what kind of mood she's in. Am I in the mood to kill someone today? Well, chapter 37. Am I in the mood to forgive someone? It'll be chapter... And it sounds bonkers to me, of course, because I'm chronological and pedantic and all that. But she's a terrific writer. It works for her. So, I always find every writer has their own process. There's no one process that's going to suit. That's going to suit every writer. There's not every, but I'm with you too in terms of the journey. The writing is the journey to find out what you're writing about. Any other questions? Here in the third row, I think.
May I ask you to stand up? Thank you very much. Would you mind if I reach across here?
Hi. First of all, I think you're both just brilliant. But I guess I had a question for Lucy, because you're like the queen of Clue, like having all of these people as your suspects, as you said. So do you ever find it challenging getting us to believe that it's one person and then totally like, I just find in your books, like, I'm constantly thrown for a loop, right? I'm dead set, okay, it has to be this person. Even though you know you're not near the end, so it can't be. But what is your process with that? Or do you ever find it really challenging to convince your reader for each one that pops up?
That is the big challenge in writing these books for me. That is the kind of number one challenge. They all have their own different challenges, each book, but that's the kind of one that they all share. And I think it's because obviously as the writer, well, when I'm writing that first draft, I haven't lost my innocence because, like Tana, I don't necessarily know who done it, who it was done to, all of that. But as soon as I've written that first draft, I've lost my innocence. And so then it all comes out in the drafting process for me, that kind of editing process, that kind of layering of clues, red herrings, putting some in, taking them away. And often, I'll think that I've really buried something and it's so kind of hidden, down the weeds. And actually, what I've actually done by burying it is I've kind of put a big kind of flashing arrow pointing right at it, or, vice versa. I think, well, I've been very fair with my reader here, and actually I haven't. It's not a breadcrumb, it's not fair, and I always want to play fair with the reader. I think that's really important. So it seems like a very roundabout way of answering the question. So in terms of that sort of motives, making sure all the motives are strong and putting them on the page, I might have the first couple of motives really fleshed out in the first draft. I might not get the kind of final motive of one of my characters until the final draft. I had a character in this book, I knew that she was there for a reason and I knew that she had something else going on, but in the first draft she was very flat. She was just kind of there. And it was a sort of, I suppose if you were painting a picture, it would be kind of, well, this is sketched out, this element of the picture, and I'll come back to that later. And I think I've learned now not to worry about it as much. No, I do worry about it, but I know that happens every time I write one of these books. And it's part of the kind of journey of discovery, I think, is like, why are you here? Why are you here? I don't understand. Why are you? And then when you realise it's this kind of moment. And I really want to talk about a thread in this book, but again, it's going to be really spoilery, but there was something else I played with in this book. It was sort of bringing in a kind of police procedural element and sort of playing with that as well. Yes, that's what I'll say.
Very good. Thank you. Should try and take someone from this side, actually, this time. So, back in row 5, I think. Sorry about that.
Hi. So I grew up on one of those tiny little islands off the west coast, not in Inishbofin. And I've noticed recently, when I was growing up, the only book that was set on an island like that was Peg, which, if you weren't, which was set in the Blaskets, and a totally different story. But I find myself wondering, because John Boyne has written a book set on an island, and Lisa O'Neill's upcoming book is going to be set on the island. Yeah, it's to do with a trip she did to the island I lived on. And I just wondered, is it a way for people to try and process the pandemic? Is this bringing people to an isolated place? And if it's not, is there something about us all having survived the pandemic that we think we can put ourselves in that tiny little space in a way that maybe before we couldn't?
It's a really interesting question, because actually the guest list came out at the beginning of the pandemic, so I'd written it sort of before that. But I think I could totally see that's a sort of valid reason for, and in the same way that the Midnight Feast is a post-COVID book, it's sort of dealing with this idea of the sort of newcomers in the countryside, or there have always been kind of newcomers to the countryside or city dwellers, but this sort of new influx, of money and sort of expectation and things. It's a great question. I kind of need to think about it some more. I mean, what do you think?
I love that idea of the island becoming representative of a sense of both like layers of isolation. I mean, I went to Irish college in Inisheer as a teenager, and every now and then, like, the island would be cut off. The boat, the Nevena, wouldn't be able to get back and forth. One time we ended up with a whole extra day of Irish college because they couldn't get us off the island, which the teachers must have been delighted. God, stuck there with 300 horrible teenagers. But that idea that it represents not only a kind of isolation, but a kind of circle drawn around you. Like the 2K circle that we weren't allowed to go outside of during lockdown, that the island has that sense of a circle within which everything happens, and within which people are connected and separated in a very specific way. I think that's a lovely way of thinking of it.
Definitely. Funny enough, I was just thinking the book that I did write in COVID was The Paris Apartment, which is the only one really that doesn't have this rural setting. It's set within an apartment building. But I think in a way that was also a sort of reaction to COVID and sort of something that was happening, which was that we had basically nothing to do. So we were all looking way too closely at our neighbours and sort of suddenly realising they had their little routines that we hadn't been aware of before, and they did some things that were kind of perhaps irritating in a way that they hadn't been before. So that was a sort of COVID response book in that sense, I think. And also just wanting to have this sort of bright lights and, buzz on the page that I wasn't getting in real life. I mean, maybe not the murder, but,
Maybe not. I think there's also an element of the kind of connections you have with people on an island being highlighted by lockdown, because all of a sudden, I don't know about you lot, but all of a sudden we had a road WhatsApp group and people were going, we've got too many tomatoes, does anybody want some? And, and trying to urge the older people, can we please get your milk for you instead of you going to the shops? So people were much more within a small community, much more intertwined.
Sure, yeah. I could sit here for the next hour, folks. I'm sure many of you could too, but Anne-Marie is, and you don't want to mess with Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie is giving me that cut it off sign. Trust me, don't. Anne-Marie, did you want to say a couple of words, or will I wrap up here? I'm very happy to wrap up, absolutely. 100%. Can I just say before you go, folks,